Hey guys, we are on Unit 5 and we are doing day 4 and we're solving equations with exponents. And you'll see a lot of our exponents on these questions are fractional. So we have to figure out how to solve when we have that situation. So our very first thing we have to remember is that we're going to need to isolate the term with the exponent, okay? And sometimes the exponent will be on a group of parentheses. We have to make sure we isolate that first, meaning we have to get it by itself, okay? Once it's by itself, then we're going to raise both sides of the equation to what we call the reciprocal power. Okay, we're going to take that fractional exponent and we're going to flip it around and we're going to raise each side to that power. And you'll see that it will remove that power and let us to be able to solve for our variable. Okay, we do have to remember one thing that's here in bold. Determine if the root number is even or odd. Okay? Determine the number of equations to solve. So when we have an even root, we have to remember that there's actually two answers. And I'm not quite sure that you guys know this, but when we have a simple equation like, let's say, x squared equals 16, there's actually two values of x that will solve this equation. We always know that you square root both sides. The square root cancels out, and the square root of 16 is 4. However, couldn't the answer be negative 4 squared and have that also come out to equal 16? And the answer is yes. And so from here on out, we actually have to realize that when you have an even root, that there are actually two answers that you get. And so we'll have to talk about that today, which is going to be a little bit of the confusing part of doing this. All right. Here's an example down below. We'll go through this so you guys can see. But right here, oops, I wanted to highlight that. I'm not drawing it. If I were to highlight x, but you have to realize it's grouped with 2, so you got to highlight that, and then there's that fractional exponent on it. And so you can see that this is already by itself, your fractional exponent, what it's on. And so we're going to use what they call the reciprocal power to go ahead and get rid of that 4/3 so that we can free x out of those parentheses. Okay, so you're going to notice that they raise it to the 3/4 in this next step. And what happens is that when you multiply these two fractions together, you get 12 over 12, which is really a 1 exponent. And when there's a 1 exponent, you don't need to write it. And so that's what makes the 4/3 disappears when you multiply by the 3/4. And you can do that as long as you raise the other side to the 3/4. Okay. And so we're going to end up with just x plus 2 on the left-hand side. But 16 raised to the 3/4 is the same thing as the 4th root, right? 4 is on the bottom, 4 goes in the crack, of 16 to the 3rd. And right here, because this is an even root, okay, there's going to be two answers. And so that's why they're putting that plus minus sign here. Okay, there's going to be, when you take the 4th root of 16 cubed, or 16 raised to the 3/4, you get 8 in your calculator. Okay, but you're going to have to remember it's going to be positive and negative 8. And so we are going to go ahead and subtract 2 from positive 8, and that's how we're going to get our one answer of 6. And then subtract 2 from a negative 8, and we get our second answer of negative 10. And if you're not sure that you're supposed to have both answers, you can always go back to the original and plug them in and double check things. Okay? Okay, so here we go. In number 1, it says solve each equation for the given variable. All right, so this is a very simple equation. It's just x cubed equals 8. And we know that to get rid of a square, we would square root. So to get rid of a cube, we could cube root. And that is one way that we could do things in cube root. However, that won't work for fractional exponents. And so if you want to get in the habit, we're going to raise this to the 1/3 power. 1/3 is the reciprocal of 3. But if I raise one side to the 1/3, I got to raise the other side to the 1/3. Okay. When you multiply 3 times 1/3, that gives you 1. And x to the first power is just x. And so that's why it works. Okay. In your calculator, you could go ahead and do 8 raised to the 1/3, or you could do some side work and say, oh, 8 raised to the 1/3 is the cube root of 8 to the first power, all right? Knowing that that's an odd root, there's only going to be one answer, all right? And that answer is going to be 2. And so if x equals 2, and you raise 2 to the third power, it would give you 8, and this is the only number that you could raise to the third power to give you 8. Okay, so that one's finished. All right, in number 2, we could do the same thing, and we could say, hey, to get rid of a square, we could square root. To get rid of a fourth, we could fourth root. Or if we want to get in shape of doing our fractional exponents today, we're going to use the reciprocal power. So the reciprocal of 4 is 1/4. And so if we raise 4 to the x to the fourth, raised to the 1/4, that will get rid of our exponent. But if we do it on one side, we have to do it on the other side. Okay? And so again, what happens is that these two exponents, 4 and 1/4, get multiplied, and 4 times a fourth turns into an exponent of 1. And x to the first power is just x. However, on the other side, we would have to take 256 and raise it to the 1/4. Or we could do and talk about some side work, is that 4 would go in the crack and 256 to the first power would go underneath. But right here, because that's an even root, that's going to indicate 2 answers. And so when we take the fourth root of 256 or raise it to the 1/4, we're going to have our 2 answers of positive 4 and negative 4. All right. And you can check them in your calculator. If you take 4 and raise it to the fourth power, you get 256. If you take negative 4 in parentheses, raise it to the fourth power, you would also get 256. Okay. And so the moral of the story is that if you don't do the side work, okay, just realize that your even number that you're looking for that gives you 2 answers is in the denominator of that fractional exponent. Okay. All right. Next one, a little bit more complicated. And we're going to have to notice something, that this negative 1/3 is only on the y. Okay. Because it's 2y isn't grouped in parentheses. So it's not on the 2, which means we're going to have to isolate this y raised to the negative 1/3 before we can use our reciprocal power. Okay, so we have to say by to the 2. So we're going to go ahead and divide by 2. So it goes. All right, and we end up with y to the negative 1/3 equals 6 divided by 2, which is 3. Okay? And now we could go ahead and use our reciprocal power. So we're going to put this in parentheses, raise it to the negative 3/1. However, negative 3/1 is just really negative 3. So if you'd rather just write negative 3, that's the same thing. Okay? A negative times a negative, because remember you're multiplying these together, would give you a positive 3/3, which is a positive 1. Okay? And so it really just gives you y to the first, or just y. All right? 3 to the negative third in our calculator is going to give us, well, technically, if you want to do some side work, this is 1/3 to the positive third, which is 1/27. Or you could type it in your calculator in Math Fracket, but just so you understand where your calculator is getting the answer from. Okay. Number 4. Again, this negative 6 exponent is only on the 6. And so we're going to have to say goodbye to the 5 in order for that exponent and the variable that it's on to be isolated. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and divide by 5 first. That's going to cancel, and that's going to give us x to the negative 6th equal to 64. All right, and now we can go ahead and use our reciprocal power. And we're going to raise it to the negative 1/6. Raise it to the negative 1/6. Okay, again, why does it work? Because when we multiply these exponents, negative times a negative is a positive, and 6 times a 6 is 1. So this is really x to the first power, which is just x. On the other side here, we can think of a couple things, or we could just type it in our calculator, all right? But this would be 1/64 raised to the 1/6, okay, which is 1/6 root of 64. Okay, and right here, guys, because that is an even root, even roots are going to give us 2 answers. Okay? Or you can think back to here that there's an even number in the denominator, and so that's where we're going to get our 2 answers from also. All right, so when we type in 64 raised to the negative 1/6, we're going to get two answers. One's going to be a positive half. However, we have to remember the other one is going to be a negative 1/2. Okay, and there's our two answers. All right, next one up. Okay. Here is our variable with our exponent on it, and we're going to notice that it's not isolated just yet. We have to get rid of this 1 here. So we're going to go ahead and subtract it. And we end up with w to the 3/2 is equal to 8. All right, we're going to go ahead and use our reciprocal power and raise this to the 2/3. And these two exponents, when multiplied together, would give us 1. And so w to the first power is just w. Okay. Right here, guys, that would be the number in the crack, meaning that it's an odd root. And odd roots only have one answer. So we could type this right in, and whatever we get is our answer. So 8 raised to the 2/3 is just going to give us 4. And there's our answer. Okay, next one up. Let's go ahead and see. Here's our exponent, and what it's on is just the a. Okay, so everything else has to go. So you're going to notice that there's two things that have to go in this one. There's a 2 and there's the -1, and hopefully you guys know that you would add 1 first. Stop remembering to write in highlighter. So we're going to go ahead and add 1, and we end up with 2a to the negative 3rd equal to 16. Don't forget that the 2 needed to go as well, so we're going to get rid of the 2, and we get a to the negative 3rd equals 8. All right, now we can go ahead and use our reciprocal power, and our reciprocal power would be negative 1/3. All right, so again, those would make an exponent of 1, and a to the first power is just a. And then the 3 is on the bottom. The 3 would go in the crack, making this an odd root. And that's only going to give us one answer. So we can go ahead and type it right in, and whatever we get is our answer. So 8 raised to the negative 1/3 is 1/2. Okay. 3 to go, and then we're done. All right, so in number 7, we can go ahead and see that our exponent of 2/5 is on this whole set of parentheses, and that those whole set of parentheses are already isolated. So we don't have to move anything before we use our reciprocal power, so we can go ahead and use it. And so we're going to go ahead and group this and raise it to the reciprocal power of 5/2. Take 9 and raise it to the reciprocal power of 5/2. 2/5 times the 5/2 that we put up there when we multiply those exponents together, because that's our rule, that turns into an exponent of 1. And so x minus 3 raised to the first power is just x minus 3. On the other side here, we have to watch out for something. That 2 is in the denominator or in the bottom, and it would go in the crack. And when a 2 goes in the crack, that would make that an even root. And even roots have 2 answers. All right, and so when we type in 9 raised to the 5/2, we have to remember that there's going to be 2 answers that come out, okay? Except our calculator will only tell one of them. We just have to realize the other one is going to be the opposite of it. And so we're going to end up with not only positive 243, we're going to also end up with negative 243. And so we're going to go ahead and set up our 2 equations here, okay? And we're going to add 3 to both of them. It's just on this side, x is going to come out to equal 246. And on this side, when I add 3, just watch out, you're adding 3 to a negative 243, which is actually going to give you a negative 240. So we have one positive answer and we have one negative answer. All right, so let's try that again. So in number 8, if we find our exponent and what it's on, we're going to realize that it's not completely isolated just yet, that we have this -1 here that we're going to have to go ahead and add. And we're going to end up with 5z minus 2 raised to the 5/3 is equal to 32. Now that it's isolated, we can go ahead and use our reciprocal power, which would be 3/5. What's nice about 3/5 is that there's an odd number on the bottom here, and that's only going to indicate one answer. All right, so one answer. All right, so over here, the 5/3 raised to the 3/5, when we multiply those exponents, they give us 1. And so that's really just our 5z minus 2 equal to, there's only one answer, so we could type in 32 raised to the 3/5 and get out 8. And then we're going to go ahead and add 2. And we get 5z equals 10. And we're going to divide by 5. And z comes out to equal 2. All right, last one. Ooh, it's messy. Here we go. All right, real quick, watch out for the common mistake with these ones. A lot of people will try to distribute the 3 into the parentheses, but keep in mind that 6/5 is only on what's in parentheses, and that if you throw the 3 in there, then it'll be on hit 2, but it's not supposed to be. It's only on the 2x plus 2, and that is one of the main reasons why we need to do this whole isolation step first. All right, we have to get what the exponent is on, which is those sets of parentheses, all by itself, so we don't put other numbers in those parentheses like the 3 out in front. Okay, so our first step here, guys, will be getting rid of the 12, so we're going to go ahead and add 12. Everything else stays the same. And this is equal to 192 now. All right. Now we're going to go ahead and get rid of the 3 so we don't accidentally put it in the parentheses where it doesn't belong. And 192 divided by 3 is 64. All right. Now that it's isolated, we're ready to go ahead and use our reciprocal power to remove that fractional exponent. So we're going to raise both sides to the 5/6. And what we have to watch out here is that 6 is on the bottom. 6 would go in the crack. 6 is an even number, making that an even root, making it have 2 answers. 2 answers. Okay. So over here, these would make an exponent of 1. And 2x plus 2 raised to the first power is just 2x plus 2. Over here, 64 raised to the 5/6 is not only going to give us positive 32, we have to remember that it's also going to give us negative 32. So we're going to go ahead and set up one of our equations, and then we'll draw the line and we'll set up our other one. So it's equal to negative 32 as well. All right, and we're going to go ahead and subtract 2. We get a 2x equal to a 30. Divide by 2, and x comes out to equal 15 on this side. All right, but there's another answer on the other side because of that even number in the reciprocal power, making it an even root, giving us 2 answers. So when we subtract 2 on this side, we're going to get 2x equal to a negative 34, and divide by 2, and x comes out to equal a negative 17. And there's our second answer. And again, if you're not sure about them, you can always go back to the original and plug them in. I'll show you guys in when we have class with my calculator so you guys can see how I would plug in. All right, and that is the end of day 4 notes. So I will see you guys on, we're going to actually skip day 5, and we're going to go right to day 6. Okay, bye guys.